You're listening to the Inside the Mix podcast with your host, Mark Matthews.
Hello folks, and in this episode I am very excited to welcome my guest today, mastering engineer and audio educator from Western Massachusetts, Ian Stewart. Ian, thank you for joining me today. How are you today?
I am excellent. I'm so excited to have this chat with you, and thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this one. So I'm very, very much looking forward to this, and it's going to be part of a nice curated group of episodes with regards to mastering that's being released at the moment. So really excited on this one. So I'm just going to read a bit of your bio for the audience listening who may not have or may not be familiar with your work. So you've worked with many wonderful independent artists and auto artists like KRS-One. And you also teach mastering at Berklee College of Music. And I've had Jonathan Weiner on a few episodes back, who is also at that particular college. And you co-developed the Bassline Pro plugin. Now that has been on my radar for a very, very long time. And I need to make that purchase, or at least try it. And I was having this discussion with another mastering engineer the other day, totally off the podcast. So that's really exciting stuff. So that's Tone Projects. And you write for the Isotope Learn blog as well. And I frequently, and I've said this before in another episode, but I frequently signpost the listeners to that particular blog as well. There's so much good stuff in there, so much good stuff. So in this episode, we're looking at mastering in particular. As I say, it's like it's part of a curated group of or series of episodes. And we were chatting off air, folks, about the list of questions I have here. We're actually going to dive straight in to AI-assisted mastering. Now, for the audience listening, if you are a returning listener, which I hope you are, if you're a new listener, welcome. You would have heard previous episodes with regards to AI mastering. So I think this is a really good place to start. So AI mastering tools are becoming increasingly available for mastering, as we well know, right? How can these tools assist independent artists and producers in achieving a professional sound at home? Maybe you could talk a bit about that and maybe some potential limitations or drawbacks to get us started.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the interesting things to kind of consider, obviously AI is a big buzzword right now. Everyone's talking about it. We're seeing it in all these different areas, right? Chat GPT and image stuff and video. Now there's AI video engines and all these things, right? So one of the things to kind of maybe understand a little bit first and foremost about AI in audio and specifically mastering is most of the products out there, right? It's easy to think, oh, AI and mastering, there's some sort of sentience inside my computer that's listening to it and figuring out how to process it on the fly. But really, most of the things out there that claim to use AI or do use some form of AI, they're using it for genre recognition, and that's kind of as far as it goes. And from there, you really don't need AI, right? So it's saying, what am I listening to? Am I listening to, a folks, kind of singer-songwriter thing with acoustic guitar and voice, or am I listening to a full-on rock song or an EDM thing or whatever? And there might be a lot of nuance in the type of genre classification that it does. But from there, it's kind of saying, okay, this is my genre. Here are the relative targets for loudness, width, dynamics, tonal balance, all these things that we tend to adjust in mastering. And just from there, it's almost like arithmetic. How do I use the processors that I have to push the song towards those targets? So I think that's the first thing to be a little bit aware of. That said, it's not to say they're not useful and they don't have a place, right? So, for people that are interested in it, yeah, I know I write for Isotope, right? So there's an association there. But even before I was writing for them, and part of why I even started, kind of working with and collaborating with them in the first place was the AI mastering assistant in Ozone, I think is at least one of the more interesting ones in that it shows you what's going on under the hood, right? So it does its master assistant thing, but then it says, hey, here's everything that I'm using, which then allows you, the end user, to go in and say, okay, maybe this has gone a little too far, or this is interesting. What if I push this slider a little bit further? And so you can at least kind of see where it's going. Or if it's totally misidentified the genre, right? You could say, well, you characterize this as pop, but I think this is more like R&B, right? So you can switch stuff there, and you get a little more control than some of the other ones online that are maybe a little more ubiquitous, I guess. But I think it's certainly a valuable tool. You know, in terms of drawbacks and limitations, I guess the first thing I'll say is I try to be really careful, you know, never say never, right? Never say, an AI will never do X, Y, Z that a human mastering engineer can do. I've heard people say, oh, you know, but a human mastering engineer will send you an email or call you up and say, hey, I'm noticing this and I, you know, fix that, or is this intentional? And while it's true that any sort of AI mastering platforms right now won't do that, I'm hesitant to say that they'll never do that. You know, I think we look at the rate that the technology, not specifically in music necessarily, but you know, there, I don't know if you know the YouTube channel MKBHD, but he did a video recently about AI generated video and how far it's come in 1 year. Like this absolutely hilariously bad video of Will Smith eating pasta and just like, you know, he's got like 6 arms and he's just shoveling pasta off a plate into his mouth, to now stuff that is very passable unless you know exactly the kind of flaws to look for. And it like stuff that if you didn't know it was AI generated and you weren't looking for that, you probably wouldn't think twice about it. So the fact that we've seen in 1 year, you know, things with video develop that far, I'm hesitant to say that audio, you know, AI couldn't be applied in audio to take over a lot of what humans do. And that's where I think the conversation actually starts to get a little more nuanced and interesting, for me anyway.
Yeah, most definitely. And what you said there about genre recognition is really interesting, because I remember having that conversation with Jonathan, because he mentioned a similar thing. And also about nuances as well. So going into the nuances of that human interaction, that human touch, that human element. And like you say, it can't do it at the moment, but it's like growth mindset, isn't it? It's like it can't do it yet, but there will come up. I don't know if I may have been like, this might have been fake news a while back, but I swear I saw something online where there was somebody having an actual interaction with an AI platform, and it was giving them real-time feedback. I kind of guess it does anyway, doesn't it? The mastering system is real-time feedback as it is.
Yeah.
But this was a conversation back and forth between two parties. Well, a human and a computer, which I thought was very, very interesting. And like you say there about how it's come on leaps and bounds, particularly with video in the last year. And I've said this before with regards to the platform I'm using for the podcast, and in particular, and other bits and pieces that I use to promote the podcast. And the artificial intelligence that these platforms are using have just like hockey stick curve in the last year. And it helps me certainly promote the podcast. It's amazing stuff. And it'd be interesting to see, what are your predictions? What do you think is going to be the next sort of big breakthrough in sort of music production? Because at the moment, I know you can deconstruct a mix, can't you? And you can separate and isolate instruments in an already mixed track. What do you think would be the next big breakthrough in like mastering with regards to AI?
I can't help but wonder if it just bypasses mastering entirely. Right? Because right now mastering is a separate discipline. Yeah. But we're going down this path of generative AI, right? That's what we're seeing with video. ChatGPT will generate entire essays and whatever, right? So like generative seems to be the direction that our people are heading. So I can very easily see it getting to a place where create me a song in the style of Taylor Swift, but with, you know, lyrics similar to, you know, pick your favorite artist that's about X, Y, and boom, finished song. No, you know, it just generates it from thin air. And to me, where that gets a little bit, I don't want to say scary. I'm not scared of it, because here's the other part, is that there's a lot about the potential behind AI and ways that I think it could help the music community. But I can very easily see not even record labels, but the streaming platforms, right? If a streaming platform has access to something like that, and we know there are people that they just want to put something on when they go to sleep or when they're in the car or when they're working on something. They're not really focused on the lyrics. They're not really consuming it as art, it's just some background noise to help them focus or sleep or whatever. And that's fine. I do that. I use that when I'm writing. If I don't have to be listening to stuff, I'll absolutely just have something on, kind of softly in the background. I think streaming platforms could very much capitalize on that. And now instead of having to pay, even a fraction of a % of royalties, which that's a separate conversation, to artists, now they have to pay none because they own it. And so like that part is a little like, why are we've got this amazing new technology. Why are we potentially going in a direction where it's taking away something from humans that they love to do? Like, none of us do this because it's the most financially viable option we have, right? I mean, it's funny. I was thinking about this morning. I haven't really talked about this much. I was a senior design engineer for a commercial audiovisual integrator for 15 years. I did classrooms at Harvard Business School. I did like a lot of, and I made a pretty nice living doing that. And that's why I had this house, and why I was able to build the studio, and why I was able to take all my income. And I've been doing mastering the whole time, but it's why I was able to take all of that income and put it back into the studio and build out the room with the tools that I have and all of that. And then I left that because I am so much happier making a little bit less money, but getting to do music all the time.
Yeah,
right. And
yeah.
there, for artists out there, you don't make music because you're getting rich doing it, right? You do it because you need to, and it does something, and in your, whether you subscribe to the idea of a soul or whatever, right? Like we need to do this. It's this thing we have to get out. And so for AI to then just be taking that and being like, it feels a little bit like low hanging fruit.
Yeah.
And if we get to the point of it being generative, that to me is like the sad dystopian future that it could be, but I don't think it has to be that, and I think that's the important thing. And I think there's some important stuff happening, some important conversations happening. My dog has entered the frame for
I
anyone
just saw that.
watching the
Beautiful
video.
looking dog.
Yeah, that's Stella. I think there are things that we can learn too from like other disciplines that are using AI, and that to me also is where it becomes. So I know that doesn't really touch on mastering, but I guess that's kind of almost where I see it going is eventually why, like, sure, we could use it. You could create a virtual assistant, or I could have an AI that deals with emails and billing, which is maybe someone's job too. I mean, there are ethical conversations like literally any direction you turn with this topic.
I think it's all really, really interesting stuff that you mentioned there. And in particular, that last point, what you made about with regards to your calendar and to-do lists and things like that. Because in my mind, I use AI to do the tasks that stop me from being creative and doing what I want to do. And it goes back to what you said earlier about, to paraphrase, scratching that creative itch, isn't it? And that's what we do ultimately. And I think with regards to AI creating content, it's interesting the thought process of like a streaming platform. Because I listen to, what do they call it? It's a playlist called, or it centers around deep concentration. And I can imagine playlists being created by generative AI for that exact purpose. But then I think you're still going to have, well, I still will, for example, you're still going to have artists that are creating music for like legacy, and it's something that they want, and it represents them. So I still think you're going to have that, but I think AI is definitely going to grow in terms of creating content, like you say, for YouTube or an advert or background music in like Wicked Tuner or something like that. I was watching that earlier, that's why I mentioned it, or something along those lines. I think that's where you're gonna that AI is going to grow. And
I think you're right in that respect. I don't think people are just, again, we've never really done this because it makes us rich or famous or whatever, right? The vast majority of artists out there aren't that. They're still just doing it because it's scratching that itch. It's something that we have to get out, right? So yeah, I don't think that's going to go away. But you look at, people are already struggle so much to make an income from streaming or whatever. And I mean, like, I'm just thinking about it. It doesn't even have to just be a playlist of stuff that's generated. It could literally be on the fly based on other things that you're listening to. right? The streaming platform knows what kind of stuff you like, so it could have a playlist that just on the fly keeps, or not even a playlist, a stream, a channel, a radio station, right? But I guess what I worry is that does that then even further box out the small independent artist?
Yeah.
And, like you mentioned, that's a lot of who I work with. I've gotten to work on a couple big cool projects, and that's awesome, and I love it. But most of who I work with are these little independent artists who may have 100 or 1,000 listeners. And so but here's the other side of that. If the streaming platforms do go that direction and they're utilizing that, that could actually be a way to subsidize artists who are getting less streams. It just takes the streaming platform not being as greedy.
That's what I was going to say, as being as greedy, yeah, 100%.
Or as capitalistic, right? There's, if you get a streaming platform that wants to actually give back to the music community and goes that route and says, hey, we're going to take all the earnings, that we get from our AI generative stuff that people are using, we're going to give a percentage of that to artists with lower play counts. Or the other place, I know we're getting totally away from mastering,
no,
and
that's
feel
fine.
free to push me back, but I guess the other place that I imagine AI in streaming that could actually be beneficial for artists. So right now, Spotify has their recommendation. There's new music on Fridays, and then they do a playlist.
There's also the Spotify DJ. I don't know if it's still a feature, actually. I was using it about a month or so ago, but it's dropped. I've been listening to Spotify all day today in the studio.
Yeah.
I don't remember seeing it, actually. I'm going to check that after the podcast. But there was a DJ feature.
Yeah, I heard my wife had that on at one point in the car, and it was kind of interesting. But one place where I can actually see it being really kind of beneficial is the way Spotify did recommendations for new music that they suggested for a while, at least my understanding of it very broadly, was they would look at a whole group of users. And if we just simplify it down to, let's say, 2 people, right? Person 1 likes artists A, B, and C, and person 2 likes artists B, C, and D. Okay, so these 2 people have 66% overlap, right? So it's not unreasonable for Spotify to say, hey, person 1, you might like artist D, and person 2, you might like artist A. That's great, but it takes a significant portion of the population that's using Spotify to discover and find those artists on their own in the first place. Whereas someplace that I can see it, there's so much music that comes out every single day, right? And that's part of the difficulty, is rising above the noise and just getting above that noise floor of how much is out there. And it's frankly more than any one person could listen to and catalog and try and tag and whatever. So there's a really cool use for AI. AI can now listen to every single new release and say, wow, here's this artist. It's their very first release. They have 50 fans that have been playing it. But this music is really similar to all these things that this group of, 3 million, I don't know what the numbers are anymore, but, 3 million people or 300,000 people or whatever I'm going to recommend this person that almost no one has heard of to all these people because the music is very aligned. And that, to me, okay, that's cool. That's a way to help artists. Right. So I think there are these very positive ways we could use some of this technology and its capabilities, to do things that either humans just can't do. Right. We can't listen to the sheer number of songs that are being released, or that we would just get too tired doing, or whatever. It's not that I'm all doom and gloom about AI. Really, the opposite. I just think we need to start being careful about how we think about it, how we talk about it, what we push not just individual users, but the bigger companies that are using it. How we give them our feedback and say, listen, if you use AI in this way, we're happy to support you. If you use it in this other way, we're going to take our money somewhere else, right? The idea of voting with your wallet is it's a big thing.
Yeah, 100%.
For me, in this household, we talk about it a lot. So
yeah. What you mentioned there, it got me thinking, actually, when you were talking about the content and how it will churn through and pass all these songs, go through them, and then categorize them in the hope, like you mentioned, about promoting you to a wider audience. But it also made me think to myself as well. I mean, if you were to go down the total, I guess you could call it the capitalist route, would there ever be? Do you think this is going a total rabbit hole now? But do you think there will ever be a time whereby this comes down to computing power as well, whereby you could put in what you want to listen to, and then it could create a bespoke song for you using a streaming platform. So a streaming platform, you put in your mood, where you are, what you want to experience, and it says, all right, I'm going to create you an entirely bespoke catalogue of music that no one's ever heard before for you to listen to right now. I was just thinking of it then when you were talking. I thought, actually, I mean, that's quite powerful, but at the same time, that's going to, I don't know if I like the idea of it.
Right, exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. Go back to the Spotify DJ filter. I did find that, I mean, I think it was in its beta phase, and some of the music it did promote to me, I was kind of like, I'm not too sure where you got that from. But then again, I think I got quite an eclectic mix of music in my liked songs that I've accumulated over the years. So I guess it's testament to that as well. Yeah. But the Friday release, I can't remember the name of it, and Release Radar, I regularly listen to those. And for the most part, it gets it quite accurate. Although I did hear there was a Rod Stewart swing track that appeared on one day, and I was like, I don't recall ever listening to some Rod Stewart swing, so I'm not entirely sure where that came in. But I think go back to sort of like the AI assisted mastering. If our listeners are using sort of AI assisted mastering, do you have sort of a top tip for the use if it's the first time they're ever going to use it? So say for example they're going to use something like Ozone. Do you have a top tip for them using it?
Well, so for something like Ozone, first of all, I would say something like Ozone, if you can swing it, right? I know it costs a little bit more, right, to get like the plugin versus just going to Lander or Aria or eMastered or whatever. But if you can swing it, the great thing about it is that it gives you all these meta level controls on the top level, right? So you can dial in things like basic loudness and how much of the width processing you want and stuff like that without even diving in super deep. So that's a really nice, useful feature that you can customize stuff a little bit to start there. And then also in Ozone, there is, and this honestly, this goes beyond AI mastering. This is just like top mastering tip, period, I think. But in Ozone, there's a loudness match feature. And just anytime you're doing something like this, turn that on and match the loudness of the master to the mix. And it'll do that automatically in Ozone. And that's another thing that separates it a little bit from some of the online platforms. Although I've seen more of them doing that, which is great to see, frankly. I'm glad that they're doing that. Because it's so easy to just be fooled. I mean, I did, perfect example of this. I did one of my first classes in the semester. We talk about level and loudness and how those things interplay and what is loudness even and all that sort of stuff. And I play an example for my students where I take two files and I say, I've done something to these. And they're thinking I've EQ'd it or I've compressed it or whatever. Because that's kind of what we've been talking about so far.
Yeah.
And all I did was change the gain of them 0.3, right? A third of a decibel.
Yeah. And
I play it and I ask them what they hear. And they go, I said, well, first of all, do you hear a difference? And they go, yeah, I think so. I think it might be an EQ thing. I think one student this year said, I think I might just be hearing the sound of my own delusion, which is like maybe one of my favorite quotes now. But just changing gain changes the way we perceive things, right? Different level. So by gain matching, you can get a much truer sense of what that processing is doing to your audio and if it's taking it in a direction that you like. And so, again, Ozone makes that really easy. You can run the master assistant. You can see what genre it has chosen, and you can correct that if you want. Or you can just try playing with different ones. You can say, okay, this picked EDM, but what if I try pop, or what if I try rock? How does that change how it's processing it? And you might get an interesting result that you like that way. And again, then just doing the loudness matching thing and hit bypass with that on, and you'll hear your mix and then the master. And that makes it so much easier to figure out have I pushed things too far? Have I made it too loud and just really crushed it? Or maybe I actually want to make it a little bit louder to get a denser sound. And you can start to judge those things objectively. Whereas if you've got a built-in gain change that's 0.3 dB or 10 dB, like making those sort of comparisons is kind of out the window.
Yeah. I think that gain, the loudness match is really important, because I think when you're first starting out, it's quite easy to, it's that classic sort of louder, that you automatically think it's better because it's louder.
Right.
And you get that, there's that false, I don't was going to say false promise then, but I think that's my flu kicking in. That made no sense whatsoever. But yeah, you want to get it down to that level so you can see where the differences are, what you're making there. So I think that's really, really good advice. Yeah. And another thing I was going to mention, or rather ask you about, was the use of reference tracks. So in particular, what are your thoughts on platforms that, I mean, AI assisted mastering without a reference track? What are your thoughts on that? Should the audience be using reference tracks? Is that sort of like, if they have access to it, is that sort of a golden rule, you should be using reference tracks? Or can we rely on what the AI assisted mastering is telling us?
I think first of all, yes. If you can, especially if you can get high quality, right? So Spotify is lossy, but like there's so many lossless and even high res options out there now. So if you can get Apple Music or Amazon, I have mixed feelings about because of how they do normalization, whatever, that's a tangent. Tidal, right? There are lots of good platforms out there. And actually, I have been, you know what, this is going to be a good kick in the butt for me. I did a whole bunch of research because I switched streaming platforms recently, and I did a ton of research. Okay. And I've been meaning to write up a blog about like what's the best streaming platform for you, right? Because it's a personalized thing. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to finish that freaking blog and get it up on my website. And so for listeners, I think by time this comes out, I will make an effort to do that. So go check that out for sure if you're interested. And there's a whole spreadsheet where you can plug in what's important to you. You know, discovery versus audio quality versus credits.
Oh, that'd be amazing.
Whatever.
I'll put that in the episode notes as well for the audience listening.
Yeah. So we'll be in touch. I'll get that written up soon and get you a link for it. But anyway, reference tracks. Right. Sorry. Get totally off track there.
That's okay.
But if you can get a lossless high res stream, or you just buy lossless downloads, or you still have CDs or whatever, I think reference tracks can be great. They can also be a little misleading if you're not careful with them. So I for me, the thing that I kind of say to my clients and my students is, yes, use reference tracks, but here are some kind of tenets to keep in mind, right? And here they are. So 1, the reference track has kind of got, it's got to be stylistically and arrangement-wise at least in the ballpark. Right, I can't tell you the number of times someone says, sends me a track and says, "Hey, can you make this sound like Radiohead or whatever?" And it's just nowhere near that in terms of arrangement or mix or anything. So no, not really. Right, like we got to be a little closer to start.
Yeah.
So first, picking references is really important, and just being honest with yourself about is this reference. Is my mix a good reflection of this reference, and vice versa? So that's kind of tenet number 1. Tenet number 2 is that I think it's really important to check against, and this is kind of gets more specifically towards mastering, check against your reference both loudness normalized and not loudness normalized. You kind of, these days, you really kind of got to do both, right? 20 years ago, everyone was worried about, am I the loudest kid on the block? And it was just, how loud are you in absolute terms compared to the next song? And everyone wanted to be louder, right? And it's still, I think, important to listen in that context. And part of the sound, right? Say you're working on, I don't know, some drum and bass stuff, and you pick out a Noisia track, right? Part of their sound may be a lot of limiting and compression and saturation and stuff. Fine. So you may need to incorporate that into your approach to get some of that sound. But then the other part that's really important is because most people are listening in a loudness normalized context these days. Like when we talk about casual listeners, not us engineers and creators and whatever, right? But just my wife, your best friend who you send your mix to and you're like, hey man, check this out, whatever, right? They're listening predominantly loudness normalized. So it's really important then to go and take your master. And so a lot of platforms use -14 LUFS. Apple uses -16. There are a few different ones. So you've just got to kind of understand what the level that any given platform or the platform you're checking against uses. But then turn your master down to that level. And now to me, the more interesting question these days is, rather than how loud is my master, is how loud does my master sound at -14 LUFS integrated? Because the LUFS measurement system is very imperfect. It's a lot better than anything we had in the past, but it's still very imperfect. And two things that both measure -14 integrated can have a very different perceived loudness. And so understanding how your master will actually sound at -14 or -16 or whatever next to all the other stuff out there today, I think that's the more important way to use a reference. Like, yes, absolutely, in terms of figuring out tonality and overall level and density and width and all that stuff, very important, provided you have the right reference. But then what's it going to sound like? And actually, this is something that I think I see and end up helping artists with more than the other thing, more than the, like, I can't get it loud enough, right? It's, I can't get it loud enough at -14, which is kind of a weird sentence to say.
Yeah. But it does make sense. It
makes sense when you think about it, right? They'll come to me and say, hey, my master's, I did my master, or so-and-so mastered it for me, and it's at -12 integrated, so it's getting turned down at least 2 dB, but it still sounds quieter than other stuff. What's going on? And that's where this gets hard to give concrete tips and explain in a nutshell, frankly. And the experience of doing this all day, every day kind of starts to kick in. So I guess if people wanted tips there, there are a couple things I can say. One, often it comes down to tonal balance. That's a really big part of it. You'll think that your EQ balance is close, and it's maybe not actually that close, or there's some part of it in the very low end or very high end that your monitors aren't really telling you a true story about. They're not giving you enough accurate information, and so it's not as close as you think it is. But then the other thing is kind of the macro dynamics, the long-term dynamics of the song, and in particular LUFS measurements. To do an integrated measurement, it uses a couple gates, where basically if a loudness value is below a gate, and the first one is at -70, so that one kind of almost doesn't matter, but then there's basically one that floats. It moves depending on what the final integrated level is. And if there's stuff that's below that, it doesn't get counted towards the final value.
Okay.
And you get into this weird situation where by actually making quiet stuff louder, you can make the measurement quieter, so it gets turned down less, which is like, that's a little mind-bending right there.
Right? It's a riddle in itself, isn't it, when you think about it?
But then, like, the takeaway from all of this is that, like, I can't tell you the number of times I have said context, in my classes this semester, but, like, context is so important, right? So we don't want to just do this just for the sake of making it playback if it's not playback a little louder on streaming if it's not the right thing for the music.
Yeah.
So, like, there are ways around this, and there are ways to figure out why one thing might sound quieter than another at -14 LUFS integrated. But then you have to make the more important decision of, okay, I can do X, Y, Z to manipulate it and make them more even, but then does the song still sound the way that I want it to and have the dynamic impact and emotional impact and all that sort of stuff? So, yeah.
Yeah. It's very interesting. As soon as you mentioned the streaming platforms and their targeted loudness, I immediately, in my head, I see these threads online of various discussions of people saying X, Y, Z, you should do this, you shouldn't do that, and whatnot. So with regards to that, I think this would be good because we are at 35 minutes now.
Sure.
And these episodes always fly by. I think it'd be good. What are your, because you've already mentioned about sort of the -14 LUFS and -16 for Apple. With regards to mastering, I mean, in my head, you're mastering. If you want to make it sound as good as possible, ultimately, that's what you want to do. You want to make it sound good. Should the audience listening, if they are using AI-assisted mastering, should they be mastering to a targeted loudness? Should they be aiming for -14, or should they be just aiming to make it sound as good as possible with what they have? What are your thoughts with regards to that?
Yeah, I think the goal is always to make it sound the best possible that it can. Certainly don't aim for any number at all. Definitely not -14, but really any number. Like you shouldn't be aiming for -6 integrated or -10 or -14 or there should be no number that in your head I have to hit. And I guess the other part of this is when you start thinking about a multi-song release, and this actually I'm gonna go back, right? I said I had a little bit of beef with Amazon Music and the way they do normalization. They normalize everything to -14, even if you're listening to an album in full.
Okay.
So when I master an album, let's say it's a more dynamic one, right? One track might be at -10, one might not be at -11.5, one might be at -9. They're gonna move around, and that's what's gonna feel artistically right for that collection of songs, based on their tonal balance, based on the arrangement, based on all these things. And if all of a sudden now you start changing relative levels between them, that's not what I did. That's not what the artist signed off on.
Yeah.
So that really frustrates me about Amazon. And I mean, it's been a couple months since I looked at them. Maybe they've changed in the last few months, but I kind of doubt it. I wish they would. I wish they would move away from that. And there's actually really good statistical data from lots of listening tests that actually shows that untrained listeners, just casual listeners, prefer album normalization, where basically you take the loudest song on an album and set that to -14 and then let everything move up and down.
Yeah, let it breathe.
As it may, right? So if one song was at, if the loudest song was at -10 and there's another that was at -12, now the one that was at -12 ends up at -16 on the normalized version. But to get a little bit back to the question really is no, I don't think you should be aiming for any specific number. And the main reason that I will point to as like evidence for this is that the numbers change. They've changed before, right? Spotify for a long time was -11, and not using LUFS, they used replay gain for a while, which is different. And then they changed to using LUFS, and then they made it -14, and then other things change and move. YouTube has changed in the past. So, and there's nothing to say that either the reference level that they use, and I really prefer that word over target, because to me a target is something that you're trying to hit. And I think if we say reference level, that's the level that they're using as their reference. That language feels a little, I don't know, to me it makes a difference in my head, so whatever. But their reference levels may change, and the way that we do normalization may change, right? Right now, everyone's kind of using integrated LUFS. Actually, when I set up a group of songs for mastering, so like I work in total tangent here, I work in Wavelab. When I bring the songs in, Wavelab has a function called the meta-normalizer. It basically allows me to take a group of clips, songs, and normalize them, but it's much more flexible than just doing integrated. And the way that I have found that seems to work the best in terms of working through my analog chain and getting levels in an even spot and sounding good is by using the loudness range, the LRA, which is another metric that LUFS spits out that people honestly don't talk about or think about it a lot. And it's sort of more like loudness range is sort of more like musical dynamics, right? The difference between the loudest fortissimo section and the really soft pianissimo stuff, right? That's sort of what loudness range is getting at. And by taking the top of the loudness range, basically the loudest average part in each song and putting those all even, the integrated levels may vary a bit, but that actually creates a spot. Then when I run stuff through analog, I'm usually tweaking things half a dB plus or minus once I capture them back in to get them at their final level. So we could change the method. That it could not be LUFS at all. It could be something totally different, right? So if you're doing a release today in 2024 and you cater it to be, you know, negative or based around -14 integrated LUFS, whether that's all of the songs or some of the songs, but you put the loudest one there or whatever, and then in 6 months stuff changes. Now you've created these set of masters that, you know, do they still sound right? Did you make sacrifices in the process of creating those masters that weren't the best for the music? So yeah, my this is a very long way of saying my goal is always just make levels in between songs, make each individual song just sound the best it can at the right level. And again, if you integrate the loudness matching thing to understand when you're pushing stuff too far in terms of level and the limiting is doing too much, it really simplifies a lot. And you can get to a place where you can really find this optimal spot, I find, for a lot of music that is above the reference level, but doesn't have to be super loud and crushed, and is still punchy and exciting, and will get turned down a little bit, and life's kind of good.
Yeah, I echo everything you said there, and I think in particular what you said about reference rather than target, and I think that's very important. But the bit you mentioned there about how standards can change and reference can change as well is important, because I've mentioned that a few times on the podcast. And when I've had people approach me and they said, you provide a master for each particular platform, and you said, well, not really, because that platform could well change, you know, and you don't know what's around the corner. So I think that's incredibly important. And I kind of want to see more of it in threads online when I see these discussions and in particular groups as well. I think it's really important.
I think the other part of that too is, like, in terms of providing, I'm surprised that I actually haven't had that many artists ask me that, clients, but that surprises me a little bit, because, like, do you as an artist want to pay for 6 different uploads to each to one platform? I wouldn't if I were in your shoes.
Yeah.
Right? So, like, that's the other part of it. Sure, I can do you 6 masters or 5 masters or whatever to different targeted loudnesses, I guess. Do you really want to pay for that? And also, I'm just going to get them sounding right and then turn them down. So,
yeah, exactly.
You know,
exactly.
So the platforms do this in an automated way. They're good at it. Let them do it, and that way, if it changes, you don't have to worry. I mean, I've even seen things that, like, DistroKid, I think, has a thing where it will pre-normalize stuff for you.
Wow.
Like, yeah, and so there are, just be aware of that. There are entities out there trying to make a quick extra buck by doing things that the streaming platform is going to do anyway.
Yeah. So you've got to be careful, haven't you? And
yeah, you do.
I think
you do.
Yeah, I mentioned this on an episode a while back, and I actually, I don't know if I mentioned it on air, but it might have been post-interview, post-chat, and it was about how there is a platform, I'm not going to name it, that you put in your video. This isn't audio, but you put in your video, and it's really good. It will select the best parts of the video. It will give you a feedback on what the video is in terms of, like, hook, trend, all that sort of stuff, which is amazing. And then it will also put the captions in there. And probably about a year ago, somebody messaged me on social media and said, I've seen your content online, I can do this for you. And basically all they did was find my YouTube video, put it into this platform, send it back to me, wanted to charge me for it. And then about a month later, I found, okay, that's what they were using, so I'm just going to do it myself.
Yeah.
I said no anyway. I was just like, I'm happy with what I'm doing. But it's a bit of a roundabout way, but it's just saying you've got to be careful. You've got to be careful, because people are out there to make a quick buck off these AI platforms, both in audio, video, imagery. Yeah, you've got to be really careful. And
I think that's a perfect kind of place to circle back around to where we started with the AI thing, right? Is that, we have to be, we do want to be careful about what the tools we're creating are, and not only how they can be used for good, but how they can be misused and exploited for financial gain or otherwise. Yeah.
Indeed. Ian, I think that's a fantastic place to end our chat today.
Sounds
it's been
good.
an absolute pleasure chatting with you on all things AI and mastering and whatnot, and everything else in between. So for our audience listening, where can they find you online? Where can they learn a bit more about what you do? And have you got any events coming up that you'd like to, or releases or anything along those lines that you'd like to push out to the audience listening?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm not on Facebook that much, except for a group called Mastering Engineers Worldwide. I'm one of the moderators there. I don't know, we've got like 10,000 or something members. If you want to come chat with mastering engineers about mastering stuff, that's definitely a great place to do it. There's a lot of big names that you've probably heard of in there, hang out, and so that's a great place to get feedback. Other than that, Instagram, Ian Stewart Music is me on Instagram, and then my website, flowtownmastering.com. It's FLOTOWN mastering.com, and that's where my blog will be. I mentioned that blog about streaming platforms. That's where I'll publish that, and I've got an FAQ about mastering, and if you just want to reach out, get in touch, that's a great place to do that. And then in terms of events, just on the topic of AI, since we're talking about it, there is the AES. Well, let's see. Berklee College of Music is hosting an international symposium by AES, the Audio Engineering Society, June 6th through 8th, I believe. It's at Berklee. It's 3 days, 3 full days. It's at Berklee in Boston, and it's all about AI and the musician. And so I think our hope there is to cultivate and foster a really good conversation about what is AI doing in music, how can we shape it, how can the AES help make recommendations, maybe along some of the lines of things we were talking about today. So if you're in the area or you can make it and you're interested in this topic, I think it will be valuable. Making your voice heard will be really valuable. I'll be there. So if you want to come meet up in person, find me on Instagram, shoot me a message, or on my website or something, and maybe we can link up there.
Fantastic stuff.
Yeah.
I remember I was chatting to Jonathan about this.
Yeah.
I can't remember if it was on the podcast or not, and I was saying I was going to look at flights to go over in June. I got to look at the bank balance, as it were, and see if it fits in, because that'd be amazing. I've always wanted. It's in Boston, isn't it?
Yeah.
I've always wanted to.
Yeah, it's right. Berklee is right in Back Bay, which is like heart of Boston. And you can get the T, which is like our subway there, out to all the different neighborhoods, and a lot of great stuff happening. It's funny. I live a couple hours west of campus, but I was out there last Friday for a concert on campus that was absolutely amazing.
Nice.
Yeah.
Fantastic stuff. Ian, I won't keep you anymore today, but it's been an absolute pleasure. And I think, again, we were discussing this off air, but we'll get you back on to chat all things mid-side. So audience, look out for that one, because I think that is going to be incredibly useful as well. So it's been an absolute pleasure, and I will catch up with you soon. Thank you.
Likewise, Mark. Thank you so much.
Cheers, buddy.